Hello and welcome to another episode of today's Conversations on Leadership, powered by Life University. I'm your host, Dr. Gilles LaMarche. A saying that today's guest lives by, and it's a great leadership quote, is the number one rule in communication is know your audience. And knowing her audience, she does. For almost 3 decades, today's guest had a successful career in environmental law, sustainability, and politics. She was a member of the Georgia House of Representatives from the 85th District for 14 years. She looks so much younger than that. And a legislative aide and attorney to Georgia Senator Mary Margaret Oliver. She was appointed by Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed to serve as the Director of Sustainability and then the Chief Resilience Officer. In my short conversation with her before this podcast, she appears very resilient. She also served as an adjunct faculty at the University of Georgia School of Law, where she graduated from the School of Law JD cum laude. She is the daughter of Williamson Sylvester Stuckey Jr., a former member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and granddaughter to Williamson Sylvester Stuckey Sr., founder of Stuckey's. In 2019, Stephanie became a first-time business owner at age 53. You'll agree she looks a lot younger than that. When she bought Stuckey's, the roadside pecan stores begun in Eastman, Georgia, by her grandparents, W.S. Stuckey Sr. and his wife Ethel during the 1930s. The purchase of all of Stuckey's shares took most of her life savings, but Stephanie knew she had to act. And I quote, "I couldn't pass on the opportunity to take back the business and see my family's legacy restored." In taking this role, Ms. Stuckey stated her optimism and personal connection to the Stuckey brand. In addition to the modest store growth, she shared how pecans and supporting the vision of the Great American Road Trip would be a central part of Stuckey's Stuckey's corporation growth. I'm honored to have with me today Ms. Stephanie Stuckey. Thank you so much for joining us, Stephanie.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And I know you said, sorry I dressed down, but you're at a candy factory today in Georgia.
Yes.
How
Pecan
fun.
shelling and candy plant, which we recently acquired, we being my business partner and I.
Congratulations.
I'm in Rennes, Georgia, population 1,900 in Jefferson County. It's right outside of Augusta.
Fantastic. So a few questions that I know that our listeners will be interested in hearing your perspective on. What is one characteristic that you believe every leader should and must possess to be a great leader?
Oh, I have to say resilience, right? Because I'm former Chief Resilience Officer for the city of Atlanta. And people always ask, what is that, resilience officer? I will tell a funny story about resilience. When I got that position with the city of Atlanta, and it was a position funded by the Rockefeller Foundation, fascinating history of that program. But my dad is hard of hearing. And when I called to tell him I had this new role, I had been sustainability officer, which is working in the environmental space. He said, Chief Resistance Officer, that's perfect for you. He misheard. And he said, you've been resisting everything I've ever tried to get you to do your whole life. You were perfect to be the resistance officer. But in some ways, resilience is resisting some of the conventional ways of thinking and doing things. So actually might have been a pretty good title, despite my dad's his opinion that it was me resisting things, which is it's a good I think it's a good characteristic to have, that you have the ability to question and think and resist the traditional way of doing things. But resilience, why I think that's so important, in its essence, resilience is the ability to bounce back. Do not take hard times as a death sentence or the end of all things, but an opportunity to either learn from it and grow and move forward, or maybe you just need to pivot, but work through those problems. I like to say that everyone loves a comeback, and that's Stuckey's. We're a comeback. And it's the very epitome of resilience is being able to revive a brand that has fallen on hard times, to not see those challenges as ending the opportunity, but just a way to rethink and be creative. And so I would say resilience is the most important.
And for some people, resiliency comes natural. What if resiliency is not natural for an individual? Any tips on how to become more resilient?
I wonder if it really is natural, because I think so much of that is forged by life experiences. People who've had cushy, easy lives where everything has been handed to them. And I went to school with a lot of trust fund babies because my dad got elected to Congress when I was a kid. And we went to a very affluent private school in Washington, D.C. Back in those days, the public schools were not good, and pretty much you needed to go to the private school. And I found that some of my classmates, their lives were so easy, they were untested, they were unchallenged. And the people I've most admired in life and in business, whether I knew them or if I've just studied their life story, they've had really tough times, and it's forged by those personal experiences. And I think without those experiences, they might not have had that resilience. Look at Warren Buffett. He started out not with wealth and worked his way up. Walt Disney is a great example.
Absolutely.
He had such poverty and such hard times and overcame them to be not only a success, but he created something that no one else had ever done. So the people I admire most are people who've had tough times, and that comes from living life and taking risk and picking yourself up. People who have that come naturally, I've never met them.
So would you believe that resilience comes with persistence?
Persistence, absolutely. Those two go hand in hand. Would you say?
I said two important qualities for leaders, aren't they?
Absolutely. I don't think there's a leader who doesn't have the ability to be resilient, who stood the test of time. It's just impossible. There's so many things that can go wrong or that can cause challenges. I mean, just today alone at the factory, we had our UPC symbols not work right, and they're not scanning. And we just got 50 cases of these new pecans, and we got to figure out what to do. I still haven't solved that problem. That's a problem du jour. So you have a French background, I'll throw in some French. I was a French major, by the way, so big fan of being a liberal arts major. Good solid background and foundation to have educationally, but you gotta deal with it. Okay, this is a challenge. How are we going to solve it?
Stick it through for sure. My next question to you: what do you think is the biggest challenge that's facing leaders today? I mean, obviously we're recording this, in June of 2021. Everybody knows what's happened in the last, 16, 18 months. So what may be some of the biggest challenge facing our leaders today?
Since I'm very much in the trenches of running a business, I'm going to give a very concrete, I'm not going to give this high and lofty. I'm going to say, here are the real issues that we're facing trying to day-to-day scrappy run a business. And that is staffing, employees, supply chain. I think those are our biggest challenges. Oh, and shipping, which that's related to supply chain. Now, we are in the manufacturing space. We also have a distribution facility. When I bought the company, we had a distribution facility and a brand. That's pretty much what I bought. We do not own or operate any of our stores. They're all franchised and in varying degrees of what I would consider brand forward. But we purchased a manufacturing facility about 5 months ago, and getting staff to work. And I'm not going to be one of those people that points to one problem or another. I think it's a variety of factors that has led to this. I don't think it's because suddenly people had these great stimulus checks. There are so many factors that go into why we have labor shortages, but it is a very real problem. We're having issues filling orders because we don't have enough people working in the factory. So that is a real problem. And then the supply chain, getting the products we need, getting our packaging so we can fill orders.
So how have you been able to be resilient, right? The word of the day,
yeah.
on a great characteristic for a leader. How have you had the ability to be resilient and continue to build your brand with these challenges?
At its crux, resilience is about looking at the underlying vulnerabilities that cause the problems. So to give the real life example that I just talked about, the problem I'm facing is a worker shortage. That's a shock in resilience talk. And I worked very closely with the Rockefeller Foundation. They have a whole program that really helps you understand how resilience works. And they talk in terms of shocks and stresses. And shocks are these events that occur almost always unexpected that cause disruptions. So for us, the shock is labor shortage. But to really solve the problem, you don't just come in and hire a bunch of people. That's not really being resilient. Resilience is not just bouncing back, but it's bouncing back in a way that's better than you were before. It's adapting and growing. So if you're sustainable and you experience a shock, you're going to bounce back, but just sustain where you were before. If you're resilient, you're going to bounce back in a way that you're actually improving and you're on this trajectory that's going higher and growing. So with the labor shortage, it's not just going out and hiring a bunch of people, the first people we can possibly find and fill the job. It's getting to the stressor. What is the underlying stressor, the very vulnerability that is causing the labor shortage for us? Well, that gets into all sorts of societal issues. We can talk about education and economic insecurity and racial discrimination and all these other factors. But at the plant level, which is what I can really have more control and influence over, part of it is we need to have a structure in place, a culture within our company that is inviting, that will attract talent and retain talent. So it's not just attracting, it's keeping who we have. And so we are really looking holistically. It's taking a little bit of time and more time than frankly we would like, because I've got orders I need to fill. And so I'm dealing with that very real issue. But rather than just slap dabbing and saying, all right, I'm going to get people on, we're going to fill these orders right away, I'm going to vendors and saying, we need 2 more weeks. We're putting processes in place. We're putting a structure in place. We're really building a brand. We're building a company. We're not just making a profit. We are building something that's going to be resilient and lasting. And so we're putting together a whole HR plan where we're providing training, good compensation, benefits, a pathway to being promoted. So when people are hired, they know we're not just hiring you at this entry-level wage. We're saying you're hired at this wage for 6 weeks. That's your probationary period. You do well, we're going to elevate you. And then if you do well, we're going to cross-train you so you can work 4 or 5 different lines in the factory. We're going to raise your skill set. We're going to teach you to be multi-talented in all the different areas that we operate in this facility. And we're going to build your skill set. And we're going to have you be part of a team. We're going to have you know each other and form relationships because you're working on the different teams. We're building something so much bigger than just run this assembly line and create this pecan divinity. And I want people to feel like they are part of something. They're part of something that's bigger than just working an assembly line. We're building something really special here. And that's resilience.
I absolutely love your insights, because you know, when you build culture, you're building families, you're building communities, you're building an understanding of the quality and the value of service to each other as teammates. So I love where you're going with that. Congratulations. What great insight to actually bring.
We're not there yet.
But you've got a plan, right? Leaders have plans, and then you're working the plan.
Got to have a plan. I'm such a believer in plans. Not that shit on a shelf that are real.
Thank you for sharing that. That's powerful insight right there for anybody listening in. My last question for you today, can you explain the impact, if any, that social networking and I guess what we often refer to as Web 2.0 has had on your organization or you personally? Obviously, you're communicating to the people.
Yes, it's been critical. And I would cite LinkedIn especially. This is a business perspective, that LinkedIn really is the hub on social media if you are interested in expanding your business or improving your business. And especially if you're a small company like us, and we may be a household name, certainly to a certain segment of people who lived during an era when we were really at our peak in the 60s and 70s, we're trying to rebuild this brand. And I refer to myself as an 80-year-old, running an 80-year-old startup. We're trying to rebuild this brand. We're trying to get the word out about what we're doing, but we don't have a big budget. People are constantly asking me, well, who does your marketing? Who's your marketing team? You're looking at it. It's me. I'm the chief marketing officer. I'm the chief sales officer. I'm the chief executive officer. You have to wear so many hats if you are running a startup, if you're an entrepreneur, and even if you're running a big business, even if you're running a Fortune 500 company that's written up in Forbes, you have to wear a lot of hats. Absolutely. And I'm doing the marketing myself. I'm getting the word out about what Stuckey's is doing. And so I've been posting every day on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. I'm getting outside my comfort zone and learning reels and short form video. I'm doing podcasts like the one today with you. Thank you for having me on. And it's been the great equalizer. As a startup, I could not afford all these conferences where these big businesses are interacting. I'm not going to be able to get to the CEO of Waffle House, for example, by going to these conferences. I can't afford them. But I can post on LinkedIn. And guess what? The CEO of Waffle House reads LinkedIn. And I raise that as an example because yesterday I got a call from the former CEO of Waffle House, now on the board, Joe Rogers, the son of the founder. And he saw some of the posts I had on LinkedIn. And I had a couple of posts that tagged Waffle House and talked about how much I admired them. And it got his attention. And he said, thank you so much. He gave me almost an hour of his time.
Wow.
I could not have gotten that kind of access were it not for social media. It's a great equalizer. So I totally encourage entrepreneurs, put yourself out there, tell your story, be creative, be vulnerable, be personal. Let people relate to you. Try to form those relationships socially because we're not being able to form them as much in person. Hopefully we're getting a lot closer to that point post-COVID, knock on wood. But take that opportunity to get out there that's affordable. And the CEO of Waffle House and the CEO of Tiny Little Stuckey's, we're both on that same social medium and we can connect that way. And I wouldn't otherwise have connected with him.
That's fantastic. I tell you, you've shared some wonderful insights for our listeners, whether they're small business people or they're startups, or they're like you, an 80-year-old startup that's really just starting all over. So any closing comments for our audience, Stephanie?
Take a risk and be vulnerable. Oh, I know what I want to say. This is something I've really been thinking about a lot. Be creative. I don't think enough CEOs in business think about being creative. And it's a great differentiator. If you are a small company, you can't win the big game. I can't compete with Walmart. I can't compete with Costco. I can't compete with Pilot or TA or Love, some of the big players, the travel centers on America's highways. I can't compete with them. I'm not going to win that game, but I can be creative. I can. That's the differentiator if you are small and scrappy, is be creative. And you have more freedom to do that if you are small and nimble. So that's my parting word. Be creative.
I love that. And I love the fact that when you're small and scrappy, in other words, you've really got to get yourself in because the business doesn't come to you until you actually go out there and get it.
That's right.
You shared some of those insights in a very powerful way today. So thank you for joining us today. Congratulations on being a woman who decided to take a risk and put it all on the line for your family's legacy. I honor you for doing that. And I thank you. It was a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share our Stuckey's comeback journey.
Thanks so much, Stephanie.